Well, good morning, and thank you all of you for joining us today. This is the second annual British Safety Council Wellbeing Conference. We're just going to wait a minute or so just to allow all attendees to log in and join. Well, good morning and welcome to the Keep Thriving Wellbeing Conference 2022. We're delighted to be hosting this event today with our sister charity Mates in Mind and the support of our wellbeing programme Being Well Together. And I do have to announce one important change to our schedule today, which is that sadly Sarah Newton, chair of the HSE, is no longer able to join us. However, we're delighted that the HSE's principal medical advisor, Dr. Steve Forman, will now deliver our keynote address. I'm your chair for the day. My name is Stephen Cooke. I'm head of policy and communications at the British Safety Council. I'll be facilitating the event, introducing the speakers and putting your questions to them as we go. And as part of my role, I lead British Safety Council's campaign on wellbeing called Keep Thriving. More on that shortly. So I'm as keen as you are to find out more about the best ways to approach and manage our own and others' wellbeing at work. Before we begin, let's just cover some basic housekeeping. Due to the number of attendees for our event today, everyone, except the speakers, will be on mute throughout. Now, I know you will all have questions, so let me just assure you, there will be an opportunity for questions at the end of each session. You can send us any questions you may have throughout the event by putting them in the question box on your control panel. We'll be monitoring these throughout, and we'll answer as many questions as possible in each Q&A session. Just so you know, the question pane is denoted with a question mark on the right-hand side of your screen. At the end of each session, the main screen will close automatically, and your browser should then automatically take you back to the Go-To Virtual Event homepage. Please then click the blue Join Session button when the next session shows as ongoing. If your browser closes completely, you may need to go back to the conference homepage on a different tab or rejoin the event using your original event link. Rest assured, if you have any technical issues at any time, please email webinar@britsafe.org. That's webinar@britsafe.org. So we're going to have 2 comfort breaks and a lunch break within the agenda for today. Although these are scheduled as sessions on the Go-To Virtual Event homepage, they are held with a slide only because we encourage everyone, this being a wellbeing conference, to take a break during these periods. The entire event will be recorded today on a session-by-session basis. So should you need to leave the event at any point, you can catch up later. You're welcome to tweet or post about this event. And if you do, please use the hashtag #KeepThriving. Right, without further ado, let's begin. As our speakers won't be controlling their slides, we will all be uttering the by now famous words, next slide please. So next slide please. And first, let's just pause and ask, what do we mean by well-being and why does it matter? So British Safety Council's own definition of well-being is an individual's ongoing state which enables a person to thrive. We all know the consequences of someone being injured or harmed at work, both to them and their family, and in terms of their absence through loss of productivity or lost resource. Indeed, the total costs in the UK of sickness absence, lost productivity through worklessness, informal caregiving and health-related productivity losses are estimated to be over £100 billion every year. But well-being goes beyond physical injury or harm, or even our mental health or stress. It encompasses all of these, as well as our social, financial, environmental, and even spiritual well-being. Next slide, please. In fact, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, the CIPD, has defined what they call the domains of our well-being. These are health, good work, values and principles, collective and social, personal growth, good lifestyle choices, and financial well-being. And we'll be exploring at least some of these in this conference, and our speakers will be covering different aspects of well-being. So do look out for these as we go. Next slide, please. British Safety Council launched its own campaign on wellbeing in May last year, Keep Thriving, following a roundtable where it decided on the name and developed a manifesto with 8 key calls for action, calls to action rather, for employers, government, and others. You can sign up and support the campaign on our website. It aims to share best practice and help organisations improve the way they manage people's well-being so we can all thrive both inside and outside of work. Next slide, please. In the campaign, we'll be making use of many national days and months that exist to raise awareness of people's health and well-being in our campaign. And you're welcome to get involved. There are many of these. You can share your own stories and case studies and successes using hashtag Keep Thriving, and also help us get the message out that well-being matters. Next slide, please. So here's what we have to look forward to today. It's a fantastic lineup, I hope you agree, of different speakers and topics. So I'll just let you pause and have a look at the agenda for a moment. But without waiting any longer, let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce the keynote speaker for this morning. So we'll move to the next slide, please. Dr. Steve Forman, who's Principal Medical Advisor of the Health and Safety Executive, HSE. Welcome, Steve. He will be delivering our keynote address entitled Workplace Wellbeing, a Blueprint for a Better Future. Steve is a consultant occupational physician and he is principal medical advisor in HSE. He leads the occupational health team in the health and work branch of the engagement and policy division. Steve provides occupational medicine expertise to colleagues across HSE and external stakeholders in a wide range of sectors. He also provides clinical oversight for the approved and appointed doctor systems for statutory medical surveillance and fitness to work assessments, and that includes lead, asbestos, ionising radiation, diving, and work in compressed air. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting HSE to speak at the conference today. Can I have the first slide, please? So HSE and the British Safety Council have a long history of working together. In recent years, there's been a growing interest in the role of employers in the well-being of their employees. As the GB regulator for work-related safety and health, it won't surprise you that we're often asked about well-being. Like every other good employer in this meeting, we are focused on our own staff's health, safety and well-being. Our people are our greatest asset, and we try hard to be a great place to work. While there is a growing body of evidence around work-related well-being, it's hard to see how there will ever be a blueprint. This is because every organisation is different and no two people are the same. Well-being needs to become part of an organisation's culture, embedded in the DNA of what it's like to work there. That is why events like today are so important. There are many routes to improving well-being in the workplace, and it is by collaborating, sharing our knowledge, and bringing together our expertise and specific remits that we can build a successful framework for the future. And it's important that we do so. I've already put a slide up on the screen there, which shows the latest labour force survey statistics, which showed in 2020 to 2021, over 800,000 workers suffered from work-related stress, depression or anxiety. and in total 1.7 million workers suffered from self-reported work-related ill health. So I'm sure you'd agree that's a huge number of people, which equates to enough people to fill over 17 Wembley stadiums. Today we will hear about the different domains of well-being and what the latest research is telling us. We'll get ideas on how employers can embed an effective well-being strategy in the workplace with the aim that their people can stay well and work productively in a healthier and happier workplace. However, with the importance of well-being rising up the agenda, there is a corresponding increase in the advice available for employers. This can cause uncertainty on what to do, with well-being initiatives ranging from those which address root causes through to those like Fresh Fruit Fridays, which can be a sticking plaster to the real issues that employees face. Although there is no one-size-fits-all approach to well-being, I can suggest a way at looking at things which could be helpful to you. So if I could have the next slide, please. When you look at what high-performing organizations do, you can see activity along a spectrum. You could term this a prevent, support, and promote spectrum, which is identified in the slide. So to illustrate what I mean, prevention is about, where possible, designing out or eliminating problems before they begin. Where this is not possible, risks should be controlled to prevent work-related ill health from occurring. So this might mean controlling exposure to hazardous chemicals, rethinking processes and how you do things to prevent poor manual handling practices, or looking at the root cause of work-related stresses in the workplace. As part of preventing work-related ill health and to meet the demands and duties that you have in this particular space, you might need to get help and advice to help you manage these risks. And that can come from somebody such as myself as an occupational health professional. In the next ring on the prevent, support, promote spectrum, we're looking at support. So this is about having the right support arrangements in place for your workers and line managers. It's about training, access to occupational health advice, employee assistance programs or EAPs, financial advice services and so on. And this often can be a HR-led environment. And in the final ring of the model, we talk about promote. This is promoting healthy living. Can I have the next slide, please? There are many examples of promoting healthy living, but very common ones are initiatives around exercise, healthy diet, and smoking cessation. Some are providing gyms or access at a discount to a variety of services. This is often what gets termed as well-being, but it's just a fraction of the reality of the term. And on the slide, I've referenced the British Safety Council report from 2018, Not Just Free Fruit, Wellbeing at Work. And I'd commend that to you as a really useful read in this respect. To make the prevent, support, promote model work well, or PSP model work well within an organization, it does require some joined up thinking. As I've suggested, often there can be different players at each stage, and what is really needed is professions to work together. So health and safety, HR, occupational health. Well-being needs a cross-disciplinary approach and doesn't just tick a box. It also needs a board-level sponsorship and leadership to create the sustainable cultural change within an organization. The benefits of collaboration and bringing together people working in different sectors who share a common purpose of aim should not be underestimated. Each organization or profession has a slightly different perspective, but the most gains will come from seeing the connections and not the differences and looking to work along the PSP spectrum. HSE will be launching its new 10-year strategy soon, and I'm really pleased that health is a key strategic objective and also there is an emphasis on collaborative working where effective. Keeping with this broader perspective, I think that successful wellbeing needs voluntary sector and professional bodies to come together and pool thinking. I'd like to pay tribute to the role the British Safety Council have played here in recent years, highlighting key issues and bringing together key players to debate issues and develop solutions. It's also something that HSE has done with our current work-related stress and mental health initiative. So what I'd like to do is give you a challenge. I think for work to be good work, an employer needs to be active at all points of the spectrum I have mentioned. However, and I would say this as an occupational physician working for HSE, with any spectrum, prevention must be key. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who coined the phrase, "A penny of prevention is worth a pound of cure." It's always worth looking at what can be prevented from causing difficulties in the workplace rather than designing coping systems for the later stages. With that in mind, every employer needs to know their health risks. Picking up on that skill of a health and safety professional, you need to think about a health risk assessment, and I'd refer you back to the concept of every company being different and therefore having different health risks and well-being needs. So in a rather simplistic example, there's little point in providing a salad and fruit bar if your employees are exposed to carcinogens during their work process. So back to the spectrum. Work in all areas if you can, but please also think about the relative levels of risk and value of intervention. There's definitely a case for subjecting wellbeing strategies to what we would call a must, should, and could assessment. In other words, what you must, should, and could do. I'd now like to tell you a bit more about what HSE is doing in the prevention space and how we are joining up where we can. However, before I start, we must acknowledge the impact the last 2 years have had on communities and businesses across Great Britain. It is safe to say that it's been an extremely challenging period. COVID has had many impacts on people's physical and mental well-being, with many negative outcomes for individuals and society around the world. Throughout the pandemic, in boardrooms across all sectors, there has been a heightened focus on staff health, and now we are all learning to live with COVID, this focus needs to be sustained. What it has shown us is how we can adapt and change rapidly, and how we can rise to challenges we thought too difficult to manage. As we may start to look forward with some optimism, we must also recognise the longer-term issues. A recent article in a medical journal, The Lancet, suggested the pandemic has led to an additional 53 million cases of major depression globally. The recent World Economic Forum Global Risks Report found mental health deterioration as one of the top 5 risks that respondents saw as having deteriorated during most of the pandemic. Even before the pandemic, mental health was a growing area of concern. So figures like these emphasize the challenges we face. So can I have the next slide, please? Therefore, work to further raise the profile of work-related stress and its link to mental health is more important than ever. Our response as HSE was the launch of our Working Minds campaign. Working with key influencers, including politicians, trade unions, charities, public health professionals, other regulators and businesses throughout Great Britain, our aim is to drive action around preventing work-related stress, whilst also promoting good mental health in the workplace. We're calling for a culture change across Britain's workplaces, where recognising and responding to the signs of stress becomes as routine as managing workplace safety. Working Minds has been developed in partnership with representatives from organisations who work in the mental health space, including Mind, ACAS, the NHS, Lifeline Scotland and Mates in Mind. In addition, we have involved business representatives including the Farm Safety Foundation, the Plastics and Composites Group, the Civil Engineering Contractors Association, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Construction Industry Advisory Committee, or CONIAC, and the UK Home Care Association. The response we have seen since launching Working Minds in November has been incredible. We've received direct responses from employees and representatives wanting to add their voice to highlight some of the challenges and solutions that are out there in the workplace. We have brought on board new partners as we extend the scope of the campaign, developing bespoke content for new sectors to increase our effectiveness. And we have seen more than 1,000 people signed up to support and champion the campaign. Working together, we look to raise awareness of what businesses need to do, their legal responsibilities, and how they support their employees to promote good mental health to improve the well-being of the workforce. That said, even given the above, there's still much more we can all do. Whilst HSE will continue to be a leading voice, having the difficult conversations where needed, taking enforcement action against those who do not comply with their legal obligations, we won't be able to make the step changes needed if we act alone. Working in partnership is one of our strengths. It's at the heart of how we protect workers. I'm therefore asking each of you to consider supporting our campaign by becoming Working Minds champions. It is worth reiterating that it's not just employees' mental well-being affected by the pandemic. The impact of restrictions created physical risks as well. To mitigate these, we have focused on ensuring employers have the right advice and guidance to manage risks associated with working from home. This work targets the health risks of working with display screen equipment, such as PCs and laptops, and manual handling that can cause musculoskeletal health problems. Finally, HC continues to focus on potentially life-changing health impacts associated with occupational lung disease. We have continued inspection campaigns in sectors such as construction, with notable success through activities such as last year's Dust Kills campaign. And in response to new research, which found the fumes associated with welding to be carcinogenic, we took action to protect workers in affected industries. So, to summarise, every organisation is different, so I can't give you a blueprint, but think about the spectrum: prevent, support and promote. You need to work in all three zones to deliver healthy work and well-being for your staff, and we all need to collaborate across professions, government and the voluntary sector. But also, let's get our priorities right. It's imperative we understand health risks and thinking that prevention is better than cure. Finally, earlier I asked you to consider supporting our Working Minds campaign by becoming a champion. To ensure that this message remains at the top of your mind, I would like to finish by showing you what our partners are saying about the campaign. So thank you very much for listening today. I'm very sorry that Sarah couldn't be with you. And if I could ask for the Working Minds video to be played.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Now I'm waiting, I'm going to get a message hopefully in a second to tell us if we're going to be able to see that video. I'm not sure that was part of the original plan. However, I'm sure that video is available on your website if people want to go and see it. So if we start with some Q&As, questions and answers, we've had a few through our question pane. If others want to submit some as well, we may be coming up with a video here. If others also want to submit, just to remind anyone or indeed let anyone know who's joined since the beginning of the session, you can submit questions for our speakers and you use the little question mark box on your control panel to type in your question, and then obviously you can put your question through that way. Now we won't see your questions on screen. I will see your questions and then I'll be able to ask the speakers for you. So that's how it will work. So they are anonymous as well, actually, just to say. So if anyone wants to say, not obviously anything, but obviously a question that you don't necessarily want to put your name against or anything, don't worry, we won't know who you are. You can submit your questions to us. So without further ado, we've got about 20 minutes actually for questions as well. So there's plenty of time if people want to ask further questions as well. Do send those in. But Steve, we've had a question through first of all about the changing workplace. And in many ways, obviously work is changing, whether that's home working, the gig economy, new technologies like artificial intelligence, and all these different things that are changing the face of work. What do you see as the major challenges to wellbeing then in the light of that and in the future?
Thank you, Stephen. Well, I would say that the biggest challenge will actually be change itself. With the emergence of new ways of working, These can outpace the guidance and legislation that exists at the moment. So our response is to ensure that HSE adapts accordingly so that our priorities and practices are fit for purpose. So what I can say with confidence is the principles of health and safety remain the same, and will continue to do so, but we will ensure that we do adapt and respond accordingly as things change.
Okay, that's great and useful to know that as well, and reassuring, obviously. In the meantime, and obviously in any case, what sort of practical steps is another question actually, this follows on quite nicely. What practical steps can businesses take to raise awareness of well-being and actually particularly mental health this person's interested in the workplace? Are there resources out there, and where can they find them?
Thank you very much. Well, as you probably be aware, the HC introduced its management standards approach to tackling work-related stress, and it's actually, that was first published in 2004, so it's been around for a very long time now, and I'm sure many of you will have seen these, and the associated tools can be found on the website. So the approach is organisational and benefit, and will assess the risk to all staff, and the solutions will therefore benefit the optimum number of people. So it's taking that higher level approach to make sure that the right measures are in place. So I would also say that the Working Minds campaign represents the same concepts in a way that is more relevant for smaller businesses. So with guidance, advice, and further support related to stress and mental health being available. So if you are interested in that particularly, if you go to our WorkRight website, so it's the workright.campaign.gov.uk/working minds, there's further information that can be found there. So the two main places are going to our HC website. There's a wealth of information on there, and also our WorkRight campaign website as well, where there's more specific advice for smaller businesses.
Okay, that's really helpful, Steve. Thank you. And you mentioned obviously the managing stress standards, and as you say, they've been in place for quite a while. I guess not every business is actually aware of them, or indeed aware of its duty to assess stress at work. Do you think we need something similar to that on wellbeing maybe as well? I mean, do you think sort of eventually we'll be introducing a similar managing set of standards or something like that around wider aspects of well-being in the future? You mentioned keeping pace with change and so on. I mean, is that something possible?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I suppose what I would do is go back to our prevent, support, and promote model. So HSE it's very much focused on the prevention aspect in terms of that particular spectrum or the model as we'd approach it. So it may well be that would be helpful to look at, but whether or not HSE is actually the right partner in that particular space or spectrum to actually take that forward, that will be a slightly different question. But I can certainly see the merits of having taking that sort of approach in a collaborative sense across all the different players that would be in this particular space. As I say, but it would be through collaborative efforts rather than HSE necessarily taking a specific lead on that particular matter, I would suggest.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting as well, because it's so all-encompassing, this, I guess, as an issue, and so broad. And indeed, there's other parts of government, different agencies, business department, others who would also, and obviously health, in terms of Department for Health as well, I guess. So it's quite a cross-government issue, isn't it, as well?
I'd agree completely. Yeah, sorry.
No, absolutely, and this is very helpful for people to sort of understand, I guess, how you're approaching it, but also government might approach this as an issue working with others. But obviously, then we've talked there about mental health and stress, and we've had a question from someone. What do you see as being the most important aspect of our well-being to address after sort of mental health and stress, if you like, or beyond mental health and stress? What might you say about that?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think it's to some degree it depends on the circumstances, but I think the key thing for me is almost taking a whole worker approach to this. So you're looking at end to end in terms of how you think about your workers and your workforce and how you think about their well-being as a whole. So it does depend on your workforce. It can depend on societal factors, depend on all sorts of different particular issues in that particular space. But I think it's being mindful that, you know, we are all human. We're not based in one realm or the other. We're not workplace beings, or we're not home beings. We're a combination of those things, and those things do overlap, and they affect us in different ways to different degrees in different parts of our lives, or even on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's important that it is taking that overarching approach and that sort of inclusive approach as how we are as people is a really important part of this. I mean, HC often looks at the effect of work on health. So in other words, the risks and how they might affect you. But an important part of that as well is how your health then impacts upon your work and what you're able to do. And well-being does form part of that as well. And to get a healthy, productive, happy, healthy workforce, you do need to be looking at all those different things. I suppose I'd still go back to my point though around prevention, making sure you've got your core of your health and safety risks managed. Just going back to the example we made around, fresh fruit on Fridays versus being exposed to carcinogens in the workplace. So I think there's a prioritization within that, and hopefully the prevent, support, promote spectrum helps to articulate that. So, but I think it does need to be that overarching approach and looking at people as holistic entities, and as our workforce as holistic entities as well.
Okay, thank you. And you meant in your presentation, and it was a very useful introduction, I think, to the day, but you mentioned COVID, and someone's actually asked, how do you think COVID might affect our ability to manage well-being? And obviously it's on a lot of people's minds, particularly as we recover from COVID and the pandemic. And what do you think therefore is the sort of biggest challenge, if you like, following the pandemic as we recover from it?
I mean, it's a really interesting question, and again, there's going to be some variation in this. So if you take, I use the statistics, in terms of, several millions of people have been identified as developing depressive disorders globally. In a recent medical paper, there's actually far more people being diagnosed with anxiety disorders, several millions more, over and above what might be expected. So in terms of the mental health burden that this has created, I think that needs to be recognized and appropriately managed. I think the other thing I would say, though, in terms of the other interesting thing, though, is things like the home working aspect. That can have both positive and negative effects on people's well-being. So for some people, it may have had a positive effect on their well-being, not having to do the commute and so on and so forth. For other people, in terms of the isolation, not being able to commune with work colleagues or friends and family and so on, that's had an extremely negative effect. So I think it's going to vary across different groups of people, and it's going to vary within people as well. And as a society, and we adapt to where, as we come to live with COVID, I think the key thing is to have the conversations. So it's understanding where our employees are, understanding what they think, making sure that managers feel enabled and empowered to have the right sorts of conversations, so they can recognize when workers' well-being has been affected, recognize when they're becoming stressed, and then take appropriate action. Because generally speaking, in any sorts of these areas, the sooner you start to ideally prevent them, but there's always going to be an element of reactive reaction to this and how you react to scenarios, and COVID hit us very, very quickly. But the sooner you address things or try to manage things, generally speaking, the better the outcome tends to be. So I think it's important to have those ongoing conversations, to make sure we're talking to our workers, understand how they're feeling, creating a culture where people do feel able to express themselves and say what they think and what's going well, what's going less well, and how you can collaborate together to come to a shared solution that works for the individual, the manager, the business at each different layer, and then building that into society as a whole.
Okay, well, we've had a fair few other questions that are now coming in, actually, so this is great, because lots to ask you, actually, Steve. And just following on from that last comment, how, you just mentioned management. How can someone asks, how can they encourage management above them to put, you know, effort and energy into your prevent, support, promote framework? And they cite money as a sort of factor in that. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important you do get that high level buy-in, because unfortunately, if you don't get that, you're not going to get the sustainability and the breadth of what you want to achieve in terms of well-being. I think it's some of these things. I mean, money was mentioned there, but it's, you know, I think there's direct and indirect sort of consequences to getting this right. So in terms of, and you know, if you think about the direct, well, you may improve productivity, so that's a direct, may have a direct effect on the bottom line and so on in terms of what the business is earning. But the other collateral that comes with that in terms of your worker well-being, their desire to go the extra mile, retention of workers, not having to go through repeated recruitment exercises because people are leaving the business because it's an unhappy place to be or not a good from a well-being perspective. So there's a lot of less tangible areas to this, which I think can be articulated to sort of hopefully move boards to sort of, hopefully they would see the benefits of doing this in the first place. But if you're in an organization where, you know, they're seemingly reluctant to do that, I think these are the sorts of areas that you can start to think about. So it's not just spending on, say, you know, whatever well-being program or training or whatever, but it's recognizing the benefits that that will bring and how that can then plant seedlings, make things grow, and you become genuinely a great place to work, both in terms of, you know, managing your health and safety risks, not having ill workers. People want to be at work, they're productive, they're engaged, and so on and so forth. So I think there's quite a wide the wide spectrum of benefits to this, and sometimes and it may depend on the business you work in, they may be less obvious or tangible than you might expect. So I think if it's almost digging those out to sort of say, well, these are the things, this is how we would benefit, this is how it'd help us in our part of the business, we think it'd help other parts of business, then hopefully that then paints the picture that engages the board level to sort of say, actually, yes, we agree, this is important, we're going to champion this, we can see this, how this would make us a better place to work, and, you know, from all aspects, we will do well. So be it fiscal or be it from a well-being or whatever perspective you look at. So I think it's just been, you might be able to be a little bit canny in terms of how you sort of think about it, if I can use that phrase, but hopefully I think there is a lot of stuff out there that can help you articulate those particular arguments.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And we've had a couple of questions around managers and encouraging them, so I think that covers that. And I guess as well, you've sort of touched on the things that you could share and do across an organization and how you might go about it. Are there any sort of top tips as part of that prevent? We've had a couple of questions on the prevent aspect of your model. Is there anything tangible that you can tell people about in terms of prevention?
Certainly, well, I mean, if we think about work-related stress, we've certainly got the talking toolkits. So we've got a bunch of resources on the HC website, which have been developed basically to help you start those conversations. So it's not just looking at the risk assessments and looking at how you need to manage any particular risk, but if we're thinking about work-related stress, but we've also produced some what they call talking toolkits, which gives you a framework, because we recognise that these sorts of conversations can be quite personal, they can be quite challenging, and it may be the manager feels reluctant, not because of any ill will or malice, it's more because they're anxious about either causing more harm or they feel uncomfortable in themselves, because again, we're talking about human beings talking to other human beings. So what we've done is produced a series of guides and, as I say, toolkits to help with those conversations, and they're all on the HC website.
Okay.
And it's not to say that's the only way of doing it, but it's a good way of starting the conversation and getting it going and getting that dialogue. It's the key to this, and where over the years I've dealt with in my practice as an occupational health doctor, I've dealt with lots of cases of stress that people have related to their workplace or stress related to home or combination of things, a whole spectrum of different mental health problems. But one of the key things always this comes down to is good communication between the workers and managers, getting the right information if you need it, if somebody does have an underlying health condition, so getting occupational health input where you need it, to bring that together. So again, you get that virtuous circle of the employer, the employee, management, and so on, all moving in the right positive direction to get the best out of the workers, and the workers getting the best out of their work.
Okay, that's great. Just there's a couple of questions around actually your Working Minds campaign. One is actually, were workers involved, representatives of workers involved in developing it? And then the second one is, how can employers also, or people in workplaces now get involved with it?
Okay. So in terms of the second question first is, we can go to the Working, it's while I've got it in my head, it's the workrightcampaign.gov.uk. So that's how you would get involved in that. In terms, there was a wide variety of people involved in developing this particular piece of work. So, but if you do have any particular thoughts or comments from a worker's perspective, or you think there's things we might need to look at, or things we might need to do differently, by all means, feed that in. Because any feedback is always really, really welcome. So I would encourage that. We produce things, and I'm pleased to say that we do land things well, if I dare say that. But if we do see things, or people see things that we might think we could usefully tweak or do slightly differently, by all means, bring that into us. And if people want to send that through to us, or send it through to me, that's not a problem at all.
Okay, great. I'm just having a look at some of these others here, because there's some interesting questions. And indeed, if we haven't got through all of them by the time we finish in a few minutes, we can, in theory, come back to people on some of their questions, particularly specific or factual ones that you're interested in. So don't worry, we won't leave it here, will we? But there are a couple of questions around office-based work, and one is that this person is an office-based environment. Most people have sedentary jobs. They've got a small gym, but a sort of no eating. It says here a no eating at work area, but I see, a sort of no eating at work to encourage staff to leave their work. Perhaps area to go to another area. But what other activities would you propose for them? And also someone asks about, if you're mainly not in the office, which is the opposite issue, particularly kind of in this current environment, you offer flexible working, but perhaps some are doing a mix of that, perhaps more at home than even in the office, or some aren't really in the office much at all, maybe just once a month. Would you see that as a hybrid pattern or not? Someone asks. Sorry, two office-based questions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting question. I think how we define what hybrid working is, I think that's one that's still being developed. And it does vary across different scenarios. So you could, to some degree, say that some of us have always worked in a hybrid fashion. So I've worked from home, worked in the office, gone out and done visits, and done all different sorts of things. So I think it could be, but I think sort of classify it as such. I think it just depends. I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to, whatever type of work you're doing and how it's organised, the risks are appropriately managed. Whichever perspective you want to look at it, either from work-related stress perspective, or the physical health issues, or if there are any exposures, and so on and so forth. So irrespective of what you call it, I think it's just important that you manage the risks across the spectrum, and that it might certainly include our health and safety risks, but it leads into the well-being risks, and so on and so forth. On the first question, on the first point around being at the office and the desk and the gym, I'd encourage anything that gets you up to move around and keep moving around. So that's all I'd really say. Now, whether you choose to go to the gym or not, I'd leave that on an individual basis. But I think it's I think anything that gets you to move around periodically, get the joints moving, certainly a bit of exercise that is extremely
Sure.
helpful to, to your heart and so on. In terms of thinking about your, your lifelong health,
Mm,
unfortunately, we're all getting older as time passes. So, it's making sure that what you do in your younger years and good patterns of what we do know is if you start well
mm,
in terms of doing exercise, keeping fit, and so on, and starting your own life, you can actually maintain really quite high levels of fitness into your more senior years, and there's some good data around that. But even if you're the other thing outside I would say to that though, it's never too late to
sure.
start, but
No,
do it
well,
in a way that's very gentle and build up. So
I think a lot of people will appreciate those comments, and the positive slant that you put on that as well, and optimistic. That's really helpful as well. But thank you so much, Steve. And it's been a really interesting and enlightening start to the day and a brilliant keynote. So thank you for your contribution. Today we're out of time. We will next hear from Ollie Patrick about the science of wellbeing.